Hello everyone, so I'm going to have a go at recreating the Battle of the Yellow Sea, which was a naval battle during the Russo-Japanese War. Here you can see my table layout with the Pre-Dreadnought fleets that I showed you in an earlier video. So at the top of the screen there is the Russian fleet, and closer to the camera down here you've got the 6 ships in the Japanese fleet. I'll sort of go through this in a bit more detail as the game goes on, but so you've got Mikasa, Asahi, Fuji, Shikishima, Nishin and Kasuga. Whereas on the Russian side over there, I'm trying to sort of keep it so that as much of the terrain is in the shot as possible. Makes it look a little bit more realistic. So at the front you've got the Tsarevich, then the Retvizan, the Pobjeda, the Pobjeda. Torpedo is the one with the yellow ochre stacks, then the Peresviet. Behind that is the cruiser, the Novik. Then you have the Sevastopol, then the Poltava, the Diana and the Pallada, which are both cruisers as well. Right, now I'm just going to set the camera up on a tripod and just talk a little bit about scale and so on. Oh yeah, while I've got it handheld, you would have noticed that there's a change in the sort of sea surface there. That's because I'm having to use 2 mats. I've got the biggest table space I can manage is 10 foot by 6, but this particular sea mat is only 8 foot by 6, so I've had to use my other tiny wargames 4 foot by 6 to make up the difference. So apologies for the change in appearance there. It was the best I could do. This mat, while I'm on the subject, I really like the colours and so on in this mat. It was from a company called Terrain Mat, and it's sort of fabric mat, so you fold it up into a roll. I've just looked them up and not unexpectedly, it appears they're no longer trading. I haven't heard anything of them in quite a few years now, but their terrain used to be really lovely. It's got a kind of grainy kind of surface to it. They all took quite a long time to produce. They didn't roll them out, in the way the newer companies like Deep Cut and Tiny Wargames can do. They were more kind of bespoke, I suppose you would call it. They've obviously ceased trading over the years because their website doesn't exist any longer. But if you ever get the opportunity to buy one of them on Bring and Buy or something like that, I can recommend them. Anyway, just going to set the camera up slightly differently now. This is just to give you an image of how what the reference I've used to set the table up. It's from this Osprey book, Russian battleship versus Japanese battleship, the Yellow Sea 1904-5, and it includes the Battle of Tsushima as well, but this is the one I'm interested in. And there you can see I've sort of set the fleets up roughly like that. The one difference, as I mentioned on the earlier video, is that I don't have a model for the Askold. So the Askold is number 3 there, I believe. And that's missing. So the Russians are down 1 ship on the historical reality. Now, scale-wise, I am using 1/600th scale ships, which are quite large for wargaming purposes. You can just about get away with it for this period because the ranges were a little bit shorter than they were for laser conflicts. But even so, the scale that I've chosen to use in terms of ground scale in order to fit on a 10-foot by 6 table is 1/600th. And as you can see here, hopefully, the gap in the respective fleets was 11 kilometres at the start of this period of the battle. Now, in 1/6,000th scale, which is the ground scale I'm using, the ships are 1/600th, ground scale is going to be 1/6,000th. In 1/6,000th scale, 11 kilometres actually works out at about 48 inches. No, I beg your pardon. It works out at 72 inches, because it's 6 inches to a mile. So in other words, these fleets would be separated at the beginning of the game by the limits of the table that I have available. So rather than put them at the very precariously at the very edges of the table, what I've decided to do is to put them at 4 feet difference between the Mikasa and the Poltava, which is how they're measuring this, and not to move the ships at all for the first 4 turns of the game, so that effectively on the table they're only separated by 8 kilometres, but I'm going to add 3,000 yards to the range estimates in the first turn, then 2,000, then 1,000, and in the 4th turn they will have actually reached a stage where they're 8 kilometres apart, and that represents the 4 feet that I've got. 8 miles apart, 8,000 yards apart. So that represents the 4 foot space that I've got between those 2 respective vessels. So I'm not going to be moving the models at all. They're just going to keep this formation, and I'm going to sort of hypothetically alter the ranges. In terms of, so that's basically to talk about the scale. These are the rules I'm going to be using, Seekrieg V. They look extremely daunting, when you begin. But they are such. I've already rehearsed this game just to make sure I've got my head around the rules again after not playing them for a while and so on, working out how I'm going to film it. And I have had such a fun, absorbing game. But what I particularly like about these rules is the sort of granularity of them. That it goes into a huge amount of detail. Whilst at the same time being very playable, simple set of rules, because all the detail is in there, but the mechanism for playing the game you can actually reduce down to, you don't really even need that first sheet of A4, so two sheets of double-sided A4, and that's all you really need to play the game. But basically everything is kind of focused down, all the detail is condensed down onto ship's logs. So you have one for each ship, so there's an awful lot of kind of paper on the table, but whilst these look confusing, they reflect all the research that has gone into each individual ship for the period. And there's very little even on this that you need to keep account of. But anyway, what I was going to say about the scale is that the primary scale that Seekrieg V uses is 1/18,000th ground scale, using ships that are 1/3000th scale in model size. So I've obviously changed both of those. So in what you get with the game are these sort of templates and so on for moving the ships. Sorry, that's not one of them. For moving the ships. So this is what you'd put down against the ship, and then it's got the knots worked off in gradations there, and whatever speed your ship is travelling at, you just move it that amount. And this is another one with this, which doesn't come into the game so much, but this is a torpedo spread template, which is based for 1/18,000th scale as well. So clearly I can't use these now, but what it's very easy to do, and what I did years ago, was blow those up. So I've got the 1/6000th scale equivalents of those, which I can use. The only other thing that you need are turning templates. So I invested in some permanent ones years ago. So that's the straightforward 1/18,000th 2-minute turn movement template, which equates to that. But you also have these turning templates. Now I can use these in the game, because whilst the movements aren't any good to me, obviously the angles aren't going to change. So 30 degrees is 30 degrees, whether it's, you know, in 1/18,000th scale or 1/6000th scale. So I'm going to be able to use these turning templates perfectly well to, if the ships turn or, you know, maneuver in any way. So I'm all set up in that respect to go. So what I was going to do in terms of explaining a little bit about the rules is just sort of film brief kind of parts of the game, because I want to sort of show you some of the dice rolling, but there's quite a lot of pre-calculation goes on prior to rolling the dice, and very often the hit probabilities are so low that you've made this kind of calculation, you roll the dice with a very low probability of being able to hit, and you miss. So there's an awful lot of, there's very little dice rolling in proportion to the amount of play that's going on in your head, as it were, which doesn't make for terribly good you know, video. So I'm going to sort of cut out a lot of that and just sort of cut to the highlights of the game, show you the occasional dice roll, you know, just on the off chance that you get the excitement of seeing a lucky hit or something like that, and it should make the game more viewable. So off to the beginning of the game. Okay, now the game's, or the turn sequence, is broken up into various sections. The first thing to do being to move all the vessels. What you're supposed to do is, if this wasn't a solo game, you would have at least 2 players controlling the ships, and those players are supposed to write down their orders on the ship's log. So on the reverse side of the log here, you have basically each ship will have a battle command rating, a bridge command rating, and that will tell you the number of orders which the ship is allowed to apply in any one turn. That gets diminished as it takes damage, as the ship takes damage, so it becomes harder to kind of operate the ship. In terms of a solo player game, though, because it's going to be very hard for me to manage so many ships. I mean, there's 15 of these ships to control. I'm not going to bother to do that unless I get to a situation where it is getting complex for the ship to be operated, and having to make choices in what orders they want to give and so on. So that's not going to be a problem. The bridge command rating and the flag command ratings, I'm going to say all the ships have ratings of 7. In terms of the battle ratings of the ships, though, I'm going to give the Japanese an advantage of 1. So the crew, they're going to have a crew rating of 1, whereas the Russians are going to be 0. And the sea, I'm assuming a perfectly flat sea, so that's going to be 0. So the battle rating on all the Japanese ships is going to be 1 higher. And that just reflects their higher state of morale and training and so on, battle readiness. So yeah, maybe I should have explained a little bit for those who don't know the history, that basically what the Battle of the Yellow Sea was about was that the Russian fleet had kind of been bottled up in Port Arthur, really. Japanese had been far more aggressive. The only kind of foray that the Russian fleet really tried to make was under the commander Makarov, and he was a far more able commander than the present commander for this battle, Whitgift. But unfortunately, during his assertive kind of foray that he made out of Port Arthur, he was on the ship Petropavlovsk, and it struck a mine and was destroyed with nearly all the crew on board, including, very sadly, the artist Vasily Vereshchagin, who painted the famous painting of Napoleon at Borodino, with his feet up on a drum that you'll probably be familiar with. He actually was a kind of war artist, and he asked to join Makarov, and made a very poor decision because he died in the same explosion. But anyway, the siege of Port Arthur is going on, and the Japanese are getting closer on land. Their artillery is getting closer to being within range of the harbour, and if that were the case, then the ships would just be sitting ducks, because they could be fired from, out of sight over hills and so on into the harbour, and the ships would all be destroyed. So the Russians are being compelled really to make a break out of Port Arthur, and they're attempting to get to Vladivostok, and the Japanese job is really to stop them and try and bottle them back up in the harbour again. And Vladivostok is that way, Port Arthur is back that way, and I'm going to roll the table, so the table's going to be rolling underneath these ships. Once they reach that end of it, I'll move them all back that way, and effectively anything that can, any Russian ship that can get off that way, I'll count the value of the ship as victory points for the Russians. Anything that falls off the table that way because it's moving too slowly or been incapacitated and so on, is going to be a score for the Japanese. And then anything that's left on the table at the end, I'll just count the damage points that each side has inflicted on the other towards the victory points as well, and we'll see who comes out on top. Anyway, so having moved the ships, and as I say, I'm not going to do that in the first turn, you now come to the firing phase. So you need to measure ranges. So I'm just going to give you one example of how this works. So you would write down on this chart here, in turn 1 you wanted whichever battery it was to fire at whichever ship you want using a particular type of shell, and then I'll show you how you work out all the various factors. So the first thing to do is to measure the range. So I want to order the Mikasa, which is the lead ship of the Japanese, to open fire on the Tsarevich. So I need to measure the range, and you do it from front funnel to front funnel, because obviously the ships are larger than the ground scale, so you don't worry about collisions or anything like that. So it's about, very roughly, 42 inches. 6 inches to is 1,000 yards, so that is 7,000 yards. So now I'm just going to change the camera angle so that you can see the paperwork a little bit more clearly. Okay, so I don't know how much of this you'll be able to actually see on the screen, but I'll just go through the process. I'm not going to show you a lot of this during the game, but it just gives you an idea of the nice sort of granularity of the rules, which is something that I really enjoy. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think it just gives a really kind of immersive feel to playing a naval battle, which you don't get in a lot of other wars. Anyway, so it's turn one. So we write down turn one, and I want the primary battery to fire at the Tsarevich. And I'm going to be using armour-piercing shell. Now, you have a choice. One of the simplifications I'm making for this set of rules, by the way, is that I'm not going to do ammunition counting. I'm just going to assume they have an unlimited supply of ammunition. You have a choice, though, of types of shell, and I could opt to fire high explosive. High explosive shell has a less penetrative effect on the armour, but it is more likely to cause fires on board enemy ships, and that is quite a sort of disabling thing for a ship to kind of be operating with fires on board. You'll see as the game goes on, it does make it much harder to actually operate the ship, whereas armour-piercing shells, if they do penetrate the enemy armour and explode inside the ship, they can certainly cause fires, but that's less their effect than the fact that they are actually damaging the internal workings of the ship, causing flooding and so on, such like. But in this case, I'm going to choose to fire armour-piercing. Now, the Mikasa has two batteries. It has a primary and a secondary battery. There's a layout. Each ship, for every ship in this game, is divided into 9 sections, and there's a historical kind of reflection of where the guns were mounted within those hypothetical sections that are on the ship. So, in the case of the Mikasa, it has 2 turrets, each with 2 barrels, and they are, told you, there are 30 centimetre, 4 by 30 centimetre guns, 2 in the front, 2 at the back. So you have to kind of be conscious of their arcs of fire and so on, but both of them are going to be able to fire on the Tsarevich, firing off that way. So I've got 4 guns being able to fire. Now, the primary and the secondary batteries also have their own fire control systems. So I'm looking now in particular at the fire control table for the primary guns, and on there you want to look at the enemy's speed. Now, I forgot to show you in that Osprey book, but it does say that all the fleet were all sailing at 14 knots. So that's how I'm going to start the game. Most of them are capable of more than 14 knots, but ships sailing in formation were obliged to kind of reduce their speed in order to maintain formation. So 14 knots is a sort of fairly, representative speed. So I know that I measured it as 7,000 yards, but I have to add 3,000 yards onto the range, remember. So we write that down here as 10,000 yards. And at 10,000 yards, it is a medium range. So we're already within medium range. So on the fire control table, I look up medium range, and we're firing at the broad aspect of the ship rather than the narrow aspect. So it's more like a broadside than firing down the length of the ship. So a target ship travelling between 10 and 18 knots at medium range gives me a fire control solution of 5, which I write in here. Now, if you remember, I said that the crew rating was 1 and the sea state was going to be 0, so that gives the Japanese ship a battle rating of 1. So you add that there, and then there are various hit factors which you have to take into account. The first one is that the enemy ship is a certain size. In the case of the Tsarevich, it is size 1, so that gives me an extra 1. At the moment, there is nothing else detracting from that cumulative score. If there were multiple ships firing on the enemy, so there were multiple shell splashes, that does reduce your firing control solution because the shells are trying to be spotted as they land, and if multiple batteries are firing, that makes it harder for you to spot the fall of the shells and so on. So we've got an extra one of 1, so it's 5 plus 1 plus 1 is 7. Now at 10,000 yards, the Mikasa is capable, each gun barrel is capable of firing 2 shells every 2 minutes. So in other words, I've got 4 gun barrels firing 2 shells, so I'm actually firing 8 shells at the enemy in this 2-minute turn. So I'm firing 8 shells at a factor of 7. So you then go to the chart giving you the surface gunfire combat resolution, and if you look here, 8 shells firing at a factor of 7 means that there is a 22% chance of a hit and a 2% chance of 2 hits. So then all we have to do is roll the dice. So I'm using yellow for Japanese, white for Russians, and I need 22 or less to get a hit. And I do, I get a 5. Great, that's a good start to the video. So it gets to show you how the rest of the game operates. Okay, so we know we've got a hit now, which is this is really unusual. On the first roll to get a hit in this game is very lucky. So now we need to know where that hit has landed, the location of the hit. So you roll on this chart here, so you're firing at the broad aspect of the ship and it was at medium range. So you roll percentile dice again to give you the location of the roll of the hit. So we rolled 53. Now 53 corresponds to what is referred to as location 7V Barbette. Now in the game, I'll just write down 7V Barbette here so I can remember that. In the game, what the game refers to is the type of armour rather than a specific location. So the 7 is just the denomination of the type of the location, doesn't really mean anything. The V stands for vertical armour, so the shell has hit a vertical surface rather than a horizontal surface, and the armour is of the type that surrounds the barbette of the ship. So in other words, it's the sort of centrally housed, highly protected part of the ship. So the armour at that point is likely to be very thick, meaning it's going to be better protected from this hit than a weaker point in the ship. So 7V Barbette. So the first thing you have to look up now is what the penetrative ability of the Mikasa's shell is against the vertical surface, and that's going to alter depending on the range. As you get closer, it's going to have greater penetrative ability. It's going to be travelling at a higher velocity and be more effective at penetrating armour. So we know it's 10,000 yards. So we look up again on the Mikasa's penetrative ability for vertical surfaces, and it's 7.3. It's a factor of 7.3 for that particular shell. Now I've written down V there, that stands for versus. We need to know on the Tsarevich what the armour thickness is for that particular type of armour. and that's on the back of the chart here. And you can see 7V Barbette, there's two values here. One is in bold type, 8.1, and the other is in thinner type, 9.8. Now that's another thing that I love about the work and the research that the rule writers have gone into. The 8.1 is the effective thickness of the armour. 9.8 is the actual thickness of the armour, but they vary depending on nationality, because armour varied in quality between the various nations and the various time periods and so on. So although it's actually 9.8 inches thick, it actually gets reduced down to effectiveness of 8.1. But nevertheless, 7.3 isn't sufficiently penetrative enough to go through 8.1 inches of armour. So that is a non-penetrative injury inflicted on the ship. So now you have the shell damage factors here, and we're looking at Class C, no penetration. The Mikasa has a shell damage factor in its primary guns of 40. So we look along the 40 there to the part C of the chart, and we can see that armour piercing does has damage points, inflicts 70 damage points on the enemy ship. So I'll just make a note of that before I forget it. 70 DPs. Now the only other thing is that with most hits that are implied that inflicted on an enemy ship, there is also a kind of proportionate chance of there being a damage effect, of something happening causing an additional damage effect. The greater the injury, the more chance there is of a greater damage effect. There are lots of specifics which I'll go into later in the game, but one might be, for instance, that there's heavier incidents of casualties on personnel, so the damage parties are less, well able to operate, something like that. But in the case of this particular hit, there's an 11% chance of a damage effect occurring. So again, we roll with the percentile dice, and we get 35. So there is no additional damage effect. So that is the total result of the hit. So all we have to do is make a note on the Tsarevich's log that they have suffered 70 damage points. Now, if you keep it up here, as you can see, that's hardly a scratch on the paintwork. The Tsarevich has got 2,064 damage points, and there's a damage tier here. So as it loses points to damage, you go through various points where you have to check for additional damage effects as a result of the general damage that the ship is taking. And again, we're certainly going to get onto that as the game goes on. But that's an example of how firing happens. As you can see, there's quite a lot of referencing to tables and so on, but once players know what they're doing, it does get, I've taken my time going through this to try and show you how the game operates, but it does get much easier to play as you get experience with the rules and so on. And it's so clever, at being able to kind of change all those factors, in order to kind of reflect different national abilities, different technical superiorities that certain nations might have over another, morale factors, all kinds of things come into effect. What I'm actually going to do in this game as well, I forgot to say at the beginning, is the two most rear ships in both enemy fleets are both of the same class. So I'm going to use the very rear ships I'm going to be using high explosive shells to exchange fire, and then that might give you and me an idea of the difference in effect of using armour piercing as against high explosives. So it's kind of going to be a little bit of an experimental part of the game. Anyway, what I'm going to do is go through, all the firing is simultaneous, so I'm going to go through all of that now with all of the ships, not show it to you on camera unless another hit is inflicted, in which case I'll go through the dice rolling involved with that particular hit. So back with you later. Okay, so we're at the end of the gunnery phase of turn 1 now. There were no further hits, so we're on to the damage phase now, and as you can see at the end of the Russian line here, we have the Pallada, which has a fire on board, and the only other damage at the moment we have to account for is over here. So this is the rear of the Japanese line. Shikushima hasn't been hit despite having 3 ships firing at her, but the Fuji also has a fire on board. So there are at least 2 ships. I think in fact there are only 2 ships. Nothing else has to deal with any damage at the moment to handle in the damage phase. I'll try a slightly different camera angle here. So this is just to give you one dice roll, just to keep the excitement going a little bit. So the Mikasa is now going to fire at the Tsarevich over there, and if you remember on the last turn it did secure a hit. Now that means that the rangefinders have succeeded, which makes it easier to hit the Tsarevich for this turn. So whereas it was firing with a solution of 7 before, it's now firing with a solution of 9. The range has come down slightly. If you remember, I'm going to reduce it by 1,000 yards for each of the first 4 turns. So the range is now 9,000, but that hasn't actually improved the situation in terms of finding the firing solution. So I'm still firing 8 rounds with a firing solution of 9, which means I have to roll 28 or less on the dice. So let's just zoom in a little bit so you can see the dice tray. .28 or less. 10, Right, so they've got a hit, so we'll run through that. Okay, give you a distant view of the Sevastopol there, just while I update you on what's going on. So I'm at the end of the gunnery phase of turn 2. Apart from that hit that the Mikasa scored on the Tsarevich, absolutely nothing hit home from either side, despite the fact that the range is diminishing and there was an added advantage to having scored hits on the previous turn, so the firing control solutions were all improved, or vastly improved in some cases. Everything missed, so I'm now on to the damage phase, and in the damage phase there are only 2 ships that need to do anything. They are the ships that have fires on them, so it's the Pallada on the Russian side and the Fuji on the Japanese side. Okay, on to turn 3, so the ranges have all come down by another 1,000 yards. Just going to show you the dice roll for the first exchange of gunnery, which is going to be on the Tsarevich there, coming from the Mikasa, which is that ship there. So as it scored a hit last time, the firing solution is 9 at the moment, so it's 8 shots at 9, which means it needs 28 or less to get another hit. Let's just drop the camera down a touch there. And we need 28 or below. 36, so it fails. Okay, so I'm going to show you one dice roll, as I've been in the habit of doing now, just to see if we get a hit. So I'm going to do the same again. The Mikasa is firing at the Tsarevich there, and because it didn't get hit last turn, it now requires 22 or less in order to achieve a hit. 55, no, so it misses. So. Well, at the moment, the Russian gunfire is proving more accurate than the Japanese, because the Pobeda there has managed to land a shell onto the Fuji again. So I'm going to roll for the results of that. Right then, determine the location first of all. So medium range, broad aspect. We rolled 64, which equates to 7V bar bet again. The only thing the Japanese are really a superior fleet. So they're taking a lot of knocks at the moment, but the thing they've got going for them is that their armour is a lot thicker than some of the some Russian ships. So as soon as the Russian ship takes a hit, the damage inflicted on them is far more serious and consequential. Okay, so at a range of 8,000 yards, which it is, the penetrative ability of the Torpedo's guns is 7.7. Now, the Fuji's pretty similarly armoured to the Mikasa, so the Barbette has got 10.9. So again, it's category C. Must remember that, category C, not category B. Hit. And the Torpedo's weight of shell is 32. Oops, sorry to knock the camera. So it is 55 damage points and a 10% chance of a damage effect. Well, it's not going to be 63. So what did I say? Memory's like I said, 55 damage points, and that's all. So Fuji got away with it. Although it has already got 150, so that will take it to 205, and its first tier checkpoint is 203, so in the damage phase it is going to have to check. Right, just to give you a bit of an overview of the battle then. End of the movement phase, which happens at the beginning of turn 5, and I've moved all the ships off camera just to save a bit of time, but the Mikasa has, rather than closing with the enemy fleet now, has turned to maintain the range. My thoughts being that if it gets any closer, it's going to come into short range, where a lucky hit from the Russian guns, and they have been quite lucky so far, could cause quite serious damage, whereas want to fight a sort of longer strategy really, where the Japanese superiority should begin to tell, and once that happens then they can move in closer to fire torpedoes and so on, but while the Russian guns are still a threat, I want to try and maintain the range. So there's a slight bend in the line there. As you can see, the Mikasa was turned and the Asahi will turn at the beginning of the next turn and so on. So there's a fire going on the Mikasa, and little bits of damage have applied to the Fuji so far, and the Shikishima, which did manage to repair its rudder quite swiftly. Then you have the Nishin, which has taken a little bit of damage, and the Kasuga, which is the biggest concern. It rolled above 15, so it's not losing speed at the moment, but as soon as it begins to lose speed and come to a halt, then effectively, it's going to be out of the game. Then over the other side of the table here, excuse me just while I pan around, I'm trying to do it maintaining the camera on the sea surface so that you get this illusion of reality. Right, at the beginning here you have the Tsarevich. In fact, everything's just steaming forward at 14 knots, including the Pallada at the end, which has still got a maximum range of speed of 15 knots at the moment. The Novik, I've put it there because that's the way it is on the diagram in the book, but it's not actually able to engage in the battle there because it's being masked by the Peresviet. But that's the way they've got it, so I'm assuming that just going to have it there as being, safely trying to get it off the table when it will score towards the Russian victory points. And that's the rest of the table. Everything, in order, apart from the poor old Pallada's now got 3 fires burning on it. So that's probably going to be in a bit of trouble. So that's the thing about, as I was saying, that it's interesting to see the effects of high explosive rather than armour piercing, because armour piercing just does damage and that's it. The damage could be quite catastrophic, but once you start a fire burning on a ship, it's a kind of a cumulative damage that occurs turn after turn until the fire's been put out. So the fires can actually, in the long run, cause more damage to the ship than a single hit from an armour piercing shell. So you have to weigh up in the balance that, plus the fact that sometimes the high explosive has a better chance of penetrating armour rather than going straight through thinner armour. So there's lots to be taken into account. But anyway, on with turn 5 now. Okay, so on to the Gunnery Fire. So I'll do a little bit of the dice rolling for the Gunfire on camera to begin with. So I'm going to show 2 salvos, one from the Tsarevich onto the Mikasa, and vice versa. So I'm going to show the exchange of fire between those 2 ships. Right, now the Mikasa, the range between the 2 ships is 7,000 yards, so that gives a final firing solution for the Mikasa of 7, and it's firing 8 rounds, and that requires a roll of 22 or less to get a hit. It does. I'm going to call that 0, so that is 6. Now had it been 3 or less, that would have been 2 hits, but that is 1 hit, so the Mikasa has scored a hit on the Tsarevich. The Tsarevich starts off with a slightly better firing solution anyway. It's got a better fire control table. It must be superior French engineering because the ship was built in France, I don't know. And then it scored a hit on the Mikasa last turn, which, as I said before, does give them advantage anyway. So that is also firing 8 rounds, but it's a fire control solution of 9. And that means it's got to score 28 or less to get a hit. And it does, it scores 14. So both ships have scored 1 hit on the other. A new day, fresh light and recharged batteries, and we're ready to go again. So turn 6, I've already moved all the ships, so a little bit to report on that. I'll just give you a sort of pan down the Russian line to begin with though. So not much change there, they're all still steaming ahead at 14 knots. Even the rearward ship there, which is on fire, that's able to keep up at the moment. But on the Japanese side, things have changed. Zoom out a little bit. So there's the Mikasa. No change there, there's still a fire going on board that they have to deal with. The Asahi has turned to run parallel with the Russian fleet as well now, but you'll notice there's a slight sort of stagger in the line there now, and that's because in the rules, as you turn, the speed is effectively reduced. So because Asahi turned slightly kind of in a slightly different spot to where the Mikasa had been when she turned, the ship lost about 4 knots of speed while it was turning, and has ended up kind of in a sort of stepped fashion like that. So no doubt the same thing will happen to the Fuji when she turns. There's the Shikishima, there's the Nishin, and at the back there, the Kasuga unfortunately did roll below 15%, so the speed is now dropped. So when you do lose propulsion, if it's not a deliberate kind of deceleration, just a sudden loss of the engines, you lose 20% of your speed, your current speed, each turn until you come to a standstill. So Kasuga is now travelling at 11 knots, but next turn it will be 8, then 5, and so on. So she's going to drop back. So her contribution to the battle is just going to be to fire off as many shots as possible while the Pallada's still in range, and then we'll no longer be able to participate in the battle. So anyway, as I say, we've done the movements, and now it's the firing. So I'm going to show you on dice tray the firing, the interchange between the Mikasa and the Tsarevich. So let's just point the camera down at the screen now. I can do this pretty straightforwardly. Both ships hit last turn, which gives them a bonus to their firing control solution. Both ships, as it happens, have the same firing control solution, even though the Japanese crew rating is better. The Tsarevich's fire control table is 1 better than the Japanese, so they even out. So both ships require a score of 28 or less in order to score another hit, and I'm using white dice for the Russians, yellow dice for the Japanese. So neither side, the Japanese scored 58, the Russians 75, so neither side scored a hit this go. Right then, turn 7. I've moved all the ships. As you can see, the Kasuga is now losing speed and beginning to drop back, and will eventually come to a standstill. But at the moment, her guns are still firing, and she's still within range of her target, the Pallada. Another ship now, the Fuji, has turned to run parallel to the Russian fleet, so there's a continuation of that staggered effect there, and the Mikasa and the Tsarevich are going to begin the firing. So I'm going to fire between the Tsarevich at the front of the Russian fleet there and the Mikasa, show you the result of that roll. So neither side hit last turn, or neither ship hit the other last turn, which has reduced their to hit factor down a little bit. So both of them require 22 or less to score a hit. Yellow, the Japanese; white, the Russians. So 73, 91, no hits again for either. Okay, the Kasuga continues to fall behind, and not much else is changing in terms of the relative positions of the ships, so we're just going to do a bit of exchange of gunfire between the Mikasa there that you saw and the Tsarevich at the front there. So I'll do this on camera again. Again, both ships needing 22 or less to score a hit. The Japanese are yellow, Russians white. 27 and 13. So the Tsarevich has scored a hit on the Mikasa. Okay, turn 9. This is just a shot looking down towards the rear of the Japanese line, and you can see the Kasuga's slipping back into the distance now. It's virtually at a standstill, and on that point I should have been taking into account its reduction in speed when I was working out the firing control solution of the fire of the Russian ship Pallada on it, because obviously as the ship slows down, it it becomes little bit easier to hit. So a stationary object is much easier to track than a moving one. So I'll have to let that go now, but we'll certainly include that in this round's Gunfire. See if it makes any difference. So coming up the fleet here, we're going to do another on-camera exchange of gunfire between the Mikasa there and the Tsarevich over there, and the factors have changed dramatically now because the rear turret has been knocked out, effectively silenced here, so the Mikasa's only able to fire 4 rounds every 2 minutes as opposed to 8 before, and at the same time the Tsarevich scored a hit on the Mikasa last turn, which improves its firing solution. So now to get a hit this turn, the Russians require 28 or less, but the Japanese require 11 or less. So I'll try and do that whilst holding the camera over the dice tray. Right, so neither side has scored a hit. The Japanese rolled 33 and the Russians 38, so no hits for either side. Okay, so turn 10, I've done all the ship movement. I've also adjusted the position of the ships on the table. As I say, it's going to be like a rolling table along its length. So the Kasuga is now at the very end of the table, and that is stationary, so that's going to remain there until the ships begin to move off the table edge again, the opposite table edge again, and then the Kasuga will just leave the game. So on to Gunfire now, and we're going to do on screen the fire between the 2 lead ships there. So the Mikasa in the foreground is going to fire at the lead ship, the Tsarevich, in the background there, and I'll do that on screen so you can see the dice roll in the hope that we'll get something positive. Okay, so it's only the front turret of the Mikasa firing now. The Tsarevich requires 22 or less, and the Mikasa requires 11 or less. So the Mikasa got 52, nothing, but the Tsarevich got 21. Okay, turn 11, and I've moved all the ships. So as before, I'm going to just show you the gunfire between the 2 lead ships, the flagships, the Mikasa and the Tsarevich there. So this time round, because the Tsarevich hit last time, It's found the range again, so it requires 28 or less, whereas the Mikassa's firing with only 4 rounds now, 2 gun barrels, 4 rounds, so that requires 11 or less. So the Mikasa, they're both missed. Okay, turn 12, the ships have moved. I'm just going to show you the first exchange of gunfire between the Tsarevich there and the Mikasa there. So the Mikasa only firing with its front turret requires 11 or less to get a hit, the Tsarevich 28 or less. Oh, the Mikasa has got a hit, whereas the Tsarevich hasn't. Tsarevich scored 90 and the Mikasa 10, so change of luck at last for the Japanese. Turn 13 then, I've moved the ships as usual, and again as usual I'm going to fire with the, or show the dice rolls for the firing on the Mikasa and the Tsarevich in front of you here. Now in the last turn the Mikasa did score a hit, so it's only firing with 1 turret, so it needs 15 or less, whereas the Tsarevich didn't, but it's firing with both turret, so it needs 22 or less. I rolled it in there, that would have been a shame because that was a 10. Got to keep it inside the tray though, so neither side has hit. That's a 50 there. Okay, so the Kasuga's being left far behind there now. There's the last ship in the line there, the Nishin. So there are now 2 shell splash markers against it because both the where are we? See if I can find it in the viewfinder. They're both the Pallada and the Diana are firing at it now, and I think I'll change the ammunition now so that the Pallada is firing armour piercing, because the high explosive definitely has a far less ability to penetrate armour, and you know, it's more useful. I've decided on softer targets than the Nishin, which is quite well armoured. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah, the other thing is now, because it's changing its target, it will, for the first turn of fire on the new target, it does suffer a penalty for acquiring a new target, so it'll temporarily be disadvantaged in that respect. But what we'll do is same as usual. We'll find the Tsarevich there. So there's the Tsarevich, and I'm going to show the exchange of fire between the Tsarevich and the Mikasa there on screen. So I'll just zoom out to the dice tray there, and no hits from either in the last turn, so we're back to the Mikasa firing fewer guns, needing an 11 or less, and the Tsarevich needing 22 or less. No, neither's won. The Tsarevich were unlucky, they got 28, but not good enough. Sorry, it's off screen there. There we go. Right, so I'll do the rest of the firing off screen and let you know if there are any hits. Yes, there's the result of the dice roll. So the Retvizan and the Asahi are exchanging fire, and the Retvizan needed less than 15 and it scored 6. So it's got one hit on the Asahi here. Okay, turn 15, and the we moved all the ships, and the Tsarevich is getting quite close to the edge of the table now. So I'm just going to show one more exchange of fire with the Mikasa there. And on the next turn, what I'm going to do is adjust the position of the ship's back again, and that means that the Kasuga will fall off the table at that point and will count towards the Russian victory points at the end of the game, which is going to go on. I mean, this has gone on hours and hours and hours, and we're nowhere near finishing it yet, so there's plenty of fight left in both ships. Anyway, so we're back to the Russians needing 22 or less and the Japanese needing 11 or less to score a hit. Neither side scores a hit. Right, so the Kasuga's come off the table. I've moved all the ships back to that edge there, so the rearmost ship is the Pallada, which is now got a maximum speed of 12 knots. So what that means for the time being, until something else happens to adjust the other ship's speeds, is that I can just move, each turn I can just move these ships forward a difference of 2 knots. So they're only going to kind of creep slowly forward, because the relative positions of all these ships and the ranges aren't going to alter. So I can kind of keep them stationary on the table and just move them gradually. So it'll give me plenty of table space to play with for the time being. So next up then, beginning of the gunnery phase of turn 16, and again I'll just show you on the dice tray the dice rolls for the exchange between the Mikasa and the Tsarevich. So at the moment the Mikasa needs 11 or less, and the Tsarevich needs 22 or less in order to score a hit. Right, so both sides score a hit. The Mikasa scored 9 and the Tsarevich 12, so there are 2 hits there. Okay, so onto the Gunnery Fire. So the ships have been moved, as I say, I'm moving them quite slowly, or a little bits now, just the difference between the speed of the Pallada and the rest. So they've on the table they don't appear to have moved very much at all. So onto the gunnery of turn 17, and one of the turrets on the Tsarevich has been knocked out now, which means both ships are firing with equal factors this turn, as they both scored a hit last time, and they're both only firing with one double-barreled turret, as it were. So both ships need a 15 in order to hit. Neither side hit. Okay, Gunfire phase of turn 18, and again I'll just show you the dice roll on the exchange between the 2 flagships there. So the Tsarevich in the lead in the distance there, and the Mikasa in the foreground. And this time, because they both missed last turn, and they're firing with equal number of turrets now. They both need 11 or less to hit. No. Okay, turn 19. We're looking down now on the battle fleets with the Russian fleet in the foreground and the Japanese fleet in the distance. And I'm going to show you the role for the exchange of gunfire between the two lead ships, the flagships. So the Tsarevich here and the Mikasa there. So again, both ships will be struggling to get hits now because they've got a reduced firing capacity with one turret each knocked out. So they both need 11 or less to hit. No. Okay, turn 20, ships have moved. Just going to show you one roll of the dice for the gunfire, which as usual is going to be between the lead ships, the flagships, the Mikasa here and the Tsarevich, which is there. Okay, so they're both on equal terms now. Both got a firing solution of 7, firing 4 rounds, which means they both require 11 or below to hit. Yellow Japanese dice, white Russian dice. Nothing again, as you would expect. Turn 21. Same again, gunnery is about to begin. I've moved the ships, gunnery is about to begin, and I will show you the roll on the exchange between the two flagships. Again, the odds of them actually scoring a hit are pretty low now, because they both had turrets knocked out, but you never know. So both sides equal, they've got to get 11 or less. 29 versus 47, so once again, no hits. Turn 22, once again, move the ships. About to show you the exchange of fire between the Tsarevich and the Mikasa, which are the two lead ships there. Again, very unlikely anything will happen because it's an 11% chance of a hit. But as soon as I film this off, or do this off camera, I'm bound to get a hit. So might as well keep up the habit. 46 plays 75. Okay, turn 23. After the movement phase, we're onto the gunnery phase. So we're going to begin with the now customary exchange of gunfire between the Mikasa and the Tsarevich. So again, all that one of them needs to do is score below 11. In the Tsarevich's case, if it takes another hit, then it's definitely losing this battle. It's far worse state of damage than the Mikasa is, although both sides have lost one turret. Anyway, here we go. 11 or less and it's a hit. Right, yeah, there we go. So the Tsarevich has scored 16, misses, but the Mikasa has scored 2. So, you know, process of attrition, the Mikasa was bound to come out better off in the end because its armour is superior. So it can absorb more hits than the Tsarevich before it takes damage. And I'm just checking. Yeah, if that had been one lower, that would have been 2 hits. If it had rolled a 1, that would have been 2 hits, but it's just 1 hit. Turn 24, and once again move the ships. I'm going to show you the exchange of fire between the Mikasa and the Tsarevich, so the two lead ships, the Mikasa here and the Tsarevich over in the front of that line there. And this time the Mikasa has a slight advantage in that she scored a hit on the Tsarevich last turn, so that improves now that the range has been found. It does give a slight improvement on the chances of scoring a hit. So move down to the dice tray here. So the Japanese are now scoring a hit on a 15 or less, whereas the Russians remain on an 11 or less. Japanese are yellow, Russians white. And both sides are back to missing. Gunfire in turn 25 now, so once again I'm going to show you the roll between the Tsarevich and the Mikasa, and Unfortunately, the ship hit last time, so we're down back to 11 or less for both sides. 63 plays 49, so no. Turn 26, and the usual procedure. I'm going to show you the dice roll between the two flagships firing, and we're back to, or we're still needing 11 or less for both sides. Oh yeah, the Mikasa there has rolled a 1, whereas the Tsarevich has missed, so that might even, I'll just check on the chart, that might even be 2 hits. It is indeed 2 hits. So let's roll the damage to see what effect that has. There's the Tsarevich there. So this could finish the Tsarevich off just in that, with that 1 dice roll. It's certainly going to cause it issues. Okay, so the locations of the hits are 7V Barbette and 3H Superstructure. So the vertical surface, the Mikasa can penetrate 8.6 inches of armour, and the horizontal 1.1, and the Tsarevich's armour in those 2 places for the Barbette is 8.1, so that is a Class A, penetrates and detonates because the shell is superior to the armour. And for the superstructure, 2.4, so that is a non-penetrative Class C. So let's deal with the explosion first of all. The Mikasa's shell is damage factor 40, so we roll to see how large the explosion will be, and it causes 140 damage points, and there is a 71% chance, yep, there's a damage effect. Okay, I'm going to roll this on camera because there is a chance of the entire ship exploding if I roll low enough. Okay, so the lower, the worse the injury. So the ship will explode, magazine explosion on a 1 or a 2. 20, no. So that is damage effect 103, which it's had actually, it's had before. I can read it out to you again from here, but I'll read it out properly. That was the one that knocked its primary, its forward turret out last time. Okay, one primary battery turret or gun mount out of action. What I'm gonna do, because it's unfair to say that the shell could only hit the unaffected turret, I am going to roll for this. So if I roll odd, it's the primary turret that it's hit again. No, I've rolled even, so it is going to be the secondary one. Right, and then we roll to determine the severity level. So last time I rolled 100, so it was irreparable. So I rolled 32. Then you add 12 to that for the weight of the shell is 44, so that rounds down to 40, so it's severity 40, so that can be fixed, but in the for the time being it can't fire any of its primary batteries, and I believe one of its secondary mounts is out of action as well, on the starboard side, which is the side pointing at, so it could switch to its secondary batteries for the time being. What else? Right, on the roll of below 70, yeah, there's an additional damage, and that will be 147. And 147 is heavy personnel casualties. During damage phase of this game turn, no DCR points are available. So it won't be able to begin to try and repair that damaged turret until next turn. Right, and that's the end of the first hit. So now we've got to deal with the second one that didn't penetrate. So that will cause 70 damage points and an 11% chance, no, so just another 70 damage points, making 210 in total. And that will take it up to 1,230 damage points, which is going to take it up to tier 6 in the damage tier section. Okay, so we're now into turn 27, and I've done all the movement, and you can see now, it's almost sort of visually apparent, the that the battle is beginning to go the Japanese way. The Tsarevich has lost a little bit of speed now, so all the following ships are basically turning so that they can avoid, you know, they'll bypass her, and they're all kind of, well, all the ones that have been hit are really suffering, especially the Tsarevich now. So getting close to a kind of conclusion of the battle. But once again, I'm going to show you the firing between the two lead ships, and it will be very different now. The Tsarevich is unable to fire its remaining primary gun at the moment because the turret is jammed and it hasn't been able to repair it, so it's firing its secondary battery. One of the secondary guns was destroyed earlier in the game, much earlier in the game, whereas the Mikasa is firing with a slight bonus because she scored 2 hits on the Tsarevich last time. So if I just point the camera down at the dice tray, I'll just try and explain the consequences of all that in the dice roll. So although they're firing with secondary guns, the Russians now, the Tsarevich is firing more gun barrels, so it's going to have 2 rolls requiring 11 or less, whereas the Mikasa is firing, has only got 1 roll and requires 15 or less, so the Mikasa is yellow. Okay, so the Mikasa has missed, the Tsarevich has missed with its first salvo, but it's still got 1 more chance to roll 11 or less. No, it doesn't, so no hits again in that exchange of fire. Right, on to turn 28, and I've moved the ships again. So the Russian fleet's sort of completed its turns now, so as it catches up on the Tsarevich, it'll be able to get past her. And I'm just going to show you the gunfire between the Tsarevich and the Mikasa again. Just so I keep a little bit of dice rolling in the battle report. Now, this time the Mikasa missed last turn, so she needs to roll 11 or less, as does the Tsarevich, but the Tsarevich is firing more guns, so she gets 2 rolls, whereas the Japanese only get 1. That seems strange to begin with, but you have to remember that if the Japanese hit, they're hitting with much larger shells, so they'll do far more damage, because the Tsarevich is still having to use its secondary batteries at the moment. So here we go. So the Japanese have missed, Tsarevich have missed with their first roll, and they missed with their second roll as well. Okay, turn 29, and the Mikassa's additional knot of speed over the Tsarevich now, because that's dropped down to 13 knots, has meant that the Mikassa's primary battery is now 6,000. The ship's separated by 6,000 yards now, so the primary battery is deemed to be firing at short range, but the Tsarevich is still obliged to be firing its secondary guns, hasn't got that turret repaired yet, which means that the secondary guns are still deemed to be at medium range. So now the Mikasa has even more of an advantage in the dice roll that I'm about to show you. Because the Mikasa needs to hit on 17 or less, whereas the Tsarevich gets 2 rolls but needs 11 or less. So here's the Mikasa, first of all, 17 or less needed. No. And the Tsarevich, 11 or less. 38 and 57, so no, still no hits. The Parasviat has taken another hit from the Shikishima. So after a long sort of dry spell where the Shikishima couldn't get any hits, now hitting quite regularly. So the hit is on location 7V Barbette. And it's now short range for the guns, so the penetrative ability at the moment is 10.4, and the Barbette armour on the Parasviat is 6.2, so again that's perfect. It's not double, so it's enough for the shell to penetrate and then detonate inside the ship, so that's going to cause the maximum damage. So the damage points caused amounts to 120 damage points, and there is a 71% chance again of a damage effect. I roll 44, so there is a damage effect. That damage effect will be, and again I'll point the camera at the dice tray just in case it is a dramatic result. So the lower the worse the damage. 38. Damage effect 109. Okay, and that is right, ready use ammo fire. So that's ammo that's been stored close to the gun, ready to fire quickly. Ready use ammo fire in one primary battery, turret or gun mount. Triple the damage points caused by this hit. So the hit's damage points now goes up to 360. Shipboard fire severity 50, so there's a severe fire. Roll to determine the location of the turret or gun mount. Now in this case, there's only the forward gun is still running, and my conjecture would be that there wouldn't be ammo stored close to it once it's stopped firing. So I'm going to say that I don't need to roll. It is going to be the other turret that's been hit. That's going to make up for some of the errors that I made that favoured the Russian side earlier, with a gun mount still being able to fire that couldn't, and I forgot to take account of it. So that mount is out of action now for the rest. So the Peresvet's guns have effectively been silenced as well. Okay. Right, okay, so this is quite bad. So a special roll is required at the end of the command phase for the next game turn only. A roll of 1 to 10 results in a magazine explosion and the ship is destroyed. Ship will remain an obstruction for following turns until a roll of 1 to 25. Right. Okay, so I must remember that next turn. So there's a possibility the ship will be destroyed anyway. And then there's a 45% chance. What's that? Yep, so there's another damage effect. Oh my word. Right, okay, so I'll just put this in front of the camera so you can see I'm not making this up. So if I roll 1 to 10, the additional damage effect is 100, and 100 is magazine explosion, because it's category A. Category 8, magazine explosion, ship destroyed, and will remain an obstruction for all following turns until a roll of 1 to 25. So the Peresvet blows up in an almighty fireball at that point. There we are, I've put some appropriate markers on to denote such a catastrophic explosion in the ship. So that's going to stay there until a roll below 25, otherwise the following ships are going to have to steer around the obstacle. Turn 30, and rolled to see if the Peresvet sinks, and it didn't, so it's remaining on the surface as an obstruction, so therefore the ships that are following it are now having to manoeuvre around the burning wreckage, and the Tsarevich has repaired the gun turret, so I'm now going to show the dice roll for the exchange of gunfire between the Mikasa and the Tsarevich, and they're back now on equal terms, so they both require a roll of 17 or less to secure a hit on the other. And the Tsarevich misses with 57, but the Mikasa hits with a 12. Okay, so that's a sort of top-down look at this next situation, which has vastly improved in favour of the Shikishima, which is this ship here. So on the other side of the table there, you can see the Peresviet's destroyed, and the Sevastopol behind it, and then the Poltava behind that have both turned to avoid the wreckage. Now the Peresviet has ceased firing on the Shikishima, which means that there are only 2 ships firing on it now, and that isn't sufficient to detract from the fire control solution of the Shikishima. So what the boat has done, what the ship has done now, is split, because it has 2 fire control solution possibilities. The fire control directors for the primary batteries. It's directing one turret against the Sevastopol and the other against the Poltava. It takes a penalty for reacquiring targets, but even so, it has managed to score a hit on the first of those 2 ships, the Sevastopol. Right, we're now at the beginning of turn 31, so this is the command phase, and at this point, if you remember, I have to roll to see whether the Tsarevich blows up due to a magazine explosion, so there's a 5% chance. So if I roll 1 to 5, so I thought I would do it on camera just in case anything happens. It's a very slim chance, but nevertheless might be the case. And I roll 66, so it's managed to get past that problem. Right, so turn 31, and I've moved the ships now. I rolled for the Peresviet and it did sink. It needed to roll less than 25, roll 22. So the Peresviet is no longer an obstruction. And I'm just going to show you the dice rolls as I normally do for the exchange of gunfire between the Tsarevich and the Mikasa. So the Mikasa hit last turn, so it's got a slight advantage. It needs to roll below 20 or below. Tsarevich needs 17 or below. Tsarevich has hit and the Mikasa hasn't. Okay, so the Tsarevich is slowing down, almost to a stop now. We're into turn 32, yeah. And the shell marker, splash marker, has been removed from the Mikasa because the Tsarevich is no longer firing on it. And the Mikasa is now going to turn her remaining guns onto the Ratvizan. So there are now, which you can see in the just beside the Tsarevich at the top of the screen, so there are now 2 splash markers against the Ratvizan because the Asahi is also firing at it. So I'm just going to show you the dice roll for the Mikasa firing on the Ratvizan. But basically, the firing control solution now is quite low because the Mikasa is listing, which has reduced the firing control efficiency, but also there's a penalty for changing target, and there's also a penalty for more than one ship firing on the same target. So basically there's only an 8% chance of the Mikasa hitting the Ratvizan. Blimey, I rolled 5, so it's hit it, even with all those factors against it. Turn 33, and the Ratvizan is now sailing past the burning wreckage of the Tsarevich, and the Mikasa and the Asahi are both firing on her. That's the Mikasa there firing. So I'm going to show you the dice roll for the Mikasa firing on the Ratvizan, and still she gets a bonus now for having hit the target last turn, doesn't get the disadvantage of reacquiring a new target, but is still listing quite heavily, making it difficult to aim the guns. So the combination of all the various factors, the fact that the Asahi's shell splashes are landing around the ship as well, means it's 15% possibility of a hit. And we roll 93, so this time there's no hit. Right, this is now turn 34. I'm going to make this the last turn of the game now, for a number of reasons. The ships are reaching the edge of the table, and I could always roll the table back as I have been doing throughout the game, but it's pretty clear now which way the battle's going, and also I was going to play the game until the log ships for the sheets were full, and that has actually now happened with the Shikishima, because the Shikishima is firing at 2 targets. So for the last few turns I've been using up 2 lines rather than 1. So whilst most of the ships are at the end of their, approaching the end of their capacity on the log sheets, the Shikishima is in this turn will reach it. So I think this is a reasonable time to call a halt. So one more turn then, and as before, you can see the Revisan there. This is the Mikasa here, and I'm going to show you just the dice roll for the firing on the Revisan from the Mikasa. Now, only one of the turrets firing, listing heavily, and didn't hit last time, so little chance of a hit. 11 or less and it's a hit. No, 72. Right then, just want to talk a little bit about the rules again and the game in general. So the thing that I really love about Seekrieg, as I said at the beginning, is the sort of level of detail that the rules go into. Now, that does make for a very kind of immersive experience when you're playing it. And in fact, in this game, I didn't do as much as I could have done in exploring various sort of details, such as ammunition consumption, fuel consumption, things like that, that would have had an impact on the game had ships run out of ammo at a crucial time, or been compelled to reduce their speed, something like that, because of fuel consumption. They're all things that might have been, you know, the naval commanders of the time would have had to have considered, but you know, there's so much that you have to incorporate into the game that it can, especially if you're controlling lots of ships, it can become overwhelming. And I think I've got, just for my own personal capabilities and so on, I think I've got just about the right amount of involvement of all these various factors that I enjoy and want. But it does make for a very ponderous game as well, and one that takes a long time to play, and I now realise isn't probably particularly interesting from the spectator's point of view, because there's a fair amount of form filling and so on, things like that. So the amount of footage that I've produced filming this game for this Batrep is immense. It's probably about 8 or 9 hours, maybe more, and I've had to kind of condense that down and edit it down in order to sort of give you something that's vaguely watchable. So I've had to sort of make a few decisions on how to present this to the YouTube audience, as it were, and it's not turned into the sort of Batrep that I would normally do. But anyway, I hope you enjoy what I have produced. But as I say, I've forgotten what I was about to say. I really, that's the thing that I really like about the rules, but it's not to everyone's taste. And this is the other thing about, this whole debate that goes on between rules that are simulations and rules that are games, and this is most certainly more of a simulation. But even so, this actual game turned into, quite clearly, if you look at the state of the the Russian fleet, you can see quite easily that the Japanese were, had the upper hand in this game. But the game did turn into a far more bloody battle than the actual historical reality. So even though the rules are, I would describe them as being a fairly accurate simulation of naval warfare, they have produced something that is a result that is far more sensational than was the case back in the Russo-Japanese War. So even allowing for the fact that this isn't something like just a game where you roll dice and you play really rapidly and quickly and have a fun time. It has kind of exaggerated some of the more sensational and dramatic aspects of naval warfare. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that, and show you some photographs and books and so on, and talk about the actual historical outcomes of the battle now. Okay, now I have always considered the Battle of the Yellow Sea to have been a Japanese victory, and I think kind of historians would confirm that it was. But this particular book, Robert Forsyth, he does point out that actually on the day, Admiral Toga absolutely failed to sink or damage or capture, not that you're likely to capture ships at this time, a single Russian ship. They all managed in one way or another to get away from the battle, and he actually did kind of lose them, and also at the same time you know, some of his ships were damaged and so on. So in on this chart here, you probably won't be able to read the outcomes of that, but he actually, it's quite interesting, he lists the damage to the various battleships in the Battle of the Yellow Sea. So in the game, the Tsarevich was sunk, the Peresviet was sunk, the Pallada was very close to sinking. It was only the fact that the Kasuga fell out of the battle that the Pallada didn't take any more damage, because that was on the point of being so badly damaged that she would have abandoned ship. So you have the Tsarevich, the Peresviet, the Pallada, and the Kasuga all taking, all you know, being points that go towards the other side in this game. So I had in total the Japanese in the game knocked 9,000. Well, they scored 9,076 victory points against the Russian scores of 4,540. So the Japanese definitely won this game, and the damage to the battleships was far more significant than actually happened on the day. Historically, you can see here, the Tsarevich was hit by 13 shells, 12 crew were wounded, 12 crew were killed, 47 wounded. One of the people killed was actually the admiral himself, Tsarevich, because towards the early part of the battle, the bridge was destroyed, Whitgift was killed, and the Tsarevich sort of veered off course, the wheel was jammed, and the rest of the fleet kind of dutifully followed the Tsarevich. The Pobjeda had 11 hits from large cells, the Peresviet 39 hits, the Poltava 12, 14 and 8 12-inch hits, the Retvizan 18 hits, and the Sevastopol, it says, was hit by several shells. But the important thing being, nothing at all actually sank during the battle. The reason that I consider the Battle of the Yellow Sea to be a Japanese victory is that the Russians failed in their aim of the fleet escaping Port Arthur and reaching Vladivostok. Some of the lighter cruisers, I think the Novik managed to get to Vladivostok, but everything else either returned to Port Arthur, where it was later shelled by the besieging Japanese's artillery and sunk in the harbour, or the ships escaped to neutral ports where they were interned for the rest of the war. So in other words, the outcome of the battle was the final kind of elimination of the Russian Pacific Fleet. And on the Japanese side, you can see here the Mikasa was actually hit 20 times and the aft gun turret was knocked out. Well, that's very, very close to what actually happened in this game. I can't remember whether it was the front or the aft turret, but one of the 12-inch gun turrets was knocked out in this game. The Asahi was hit by one 12-inch shell near the waterline, and both its aft 12-inch guns burst, and also the Shikishima's 12-inch gun, one of the forward 12-inch guns burst. Now, that wasn't as a result of being hit, it was a result of the volatile explosive that was in a lot of the Japanese shells, that they actually burst as they left the gun, exploded as they left the gun. So some of the damage on the Japanese ships here was self-inflicted, as it were. As I say, Whitgift was killed in the battle, and the Tsarevich went to a neutral port, a British port in China. Let's see if I can... open this up a little bit to the camera. So you may not be able to see, this is a picture of the Tsarevich in her heyday. I think absolutely beautiful ship, but down here you can see a picture of the damaged stern of the Tsarevich. The port was called Kiao Chao. Not sure what the modern name of that is. And it shows you some of the damage, some of the battering that the ship actually took on the day. So, you know, very kind of frightful kind of effect of the explosives. The only ship that really, you know, survived and wasn't damaged in the harbour of Port Arthur was the Sevastopol, and that actually scuttled itself during an encounter with the Japanese. It got out of Port Arthur. Here's a to zoom out again. So here is a map of the harbour of Port Arthur with an indication of where the wrecks of all the various Russian ships were. But basically, as the siege lines got closer to the actual centre and harbour of Port Arthur, the Japanese were able to shell all these ships in the harbour, and you can see the result of that in some of these images. So there is the Poltava, which has settled in the water, having been hit by Japanese shells. This is the Retvizan, same again. This is the Peresviet, which, as you can see, the rear has settled in the water where it's been holed by Japanese shells. And in the game, the Peresviet was actually destroyed in the battle. So that was the eventual kind of outcome of, you know, the battle. That all these ships. Here are some of the minor ones that didn't feature in gunboats and so on. But the Sevastopol there, depending on what you read, I mean, here it says Russian battleship Sevastopol just before it was sunk, whereas you know, I've read where it was deliberately sunk rather than allowed to fall into the hands of the Japanese. But all those ships in the harbour were refloated by the Japanese, so they actually became Japanese ships, and you can see that from the log sheets that I printed out for the game. This is the sort of level of detail that you get from the rules Seekrieg. So it tells you the eventual outcome of the various ships, and the Tsarevich, after the war, after the Russo-Japanese War, was allowed to leave the neutral port, and it returned to the Baltic and served in the Russians' Baltic fleet. But by the time of the First World War, it was, you know, fairly obsolete. So that was the end of its kind of military career. But the Retvizan was repaired by Japan, renamed the Heisen. The Torpedo was repaired by Japan and renamed Isuo. The Peresviet was repaired by Japan and renamed Sagami. The Novik, it says scuttled in 1904, but raised by the Japanese and commissioned as the Suzuya. The Sevastopol was the one that the Russians scuttled themselves. The Poltava was repaired by Japan and renamed Tango. The Diana and the Diana, not sure what happened to the Diana. It certainly escaped, I think it escaped to Saigon, was interned, so it would have been restored to the Russian fleet after the war. And the Pallada was raised by the Japanese and commissioned as the Tsugaru. So you can see the majority of the fleets, the majority of the ships actually ended up in Japanese hands. The only one I haven't mentioned, because I didn't have a model for it, was the Askold, and that actually escaped to a neutral port and featured very prominently in the First World War. And I intend to do a video on the subject of the history of the Askold in the sort of relatively near future. But anyway, that's the end of my Batrep. Extremely long, even heavily edited. It is going to be several hours long. Hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed playing it. And thanks for watching. I'll see you again on another video. Bye for now.